I am Lauren, 33 years old, and until recently I thought I had grown numb to my family playing favorites. As the founder and CEO of a high-profile public relations firm in Chicago, I built a life far removed from their constant comparisons. But last Tuesday, I found myself staring at an Instagram live video that shattered whatever was left of my patience. It was my twin sister Brittany giving her followers a private tour of the Grand Solarium, a venue with a $34,000 minimum spend to celebrate her upcoming 33rd birthday. Our shared birthday. An event I was explicitly not invited to. What she did not know was that the event planner walking right behind her in the video worked for me, and by the end of the week, I would use that $34,000 party to tear down her entire fake reality. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members who tried to keep you in their shadow. It was a rainy Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago. I was sitting at my usual corner table at a quiet cafe in the Gold Coast neighborhood, sipping a black coffee and reviewing quarterly reports for my agency, Lumina PR. I have always kept my professional life strictly separated from my family. To them, I was just Lauren, the quiet, boring twin who lived in a basic apartment and worked some entry-level corporate job answering phones. I preferred it that way. It kept them from asking me for money. I took a break from my spreadsheets and idly tapped on the Instagram app. Brittany's face instantly popped up. She was glowing, wearing a designer trench coat, holding her phone high to capture the massive crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the Grand Solarium. It is the most exclusive event space in the city. I know this because my firm regularly books it for celebrity clients and tech billionaires. Brittany was twirling around, squealing to her thousands of followers about how this was going to be the most epic birthday gala of the decade. She went on and on about the caviar bar, the custom ice sculptures, and the elite guest list. I watched, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest. We are twins. We were born exactly 14 minutes apart. Yet here she was throwing a gala for our 33rd birthday, and I had not even received a text message. Then the camera panned to the right. A young woman in a sharp black blazer stepped into the frame holding a clipboard and nodding enthusiastically at everything Brittany said. I nearly choked on my coffee. It was Sydney, a junior event coordinator who works at my agency. Lumina PR handles high-end event management as part of our corporate packages. Sydney had no idea she was planning a party for her boss's estranged twin sister. I keep my last name off our public-facing website, and I rarely interact with the junior event staff directly. I watched Sydney assure Brittany that the floral arrangements would be flown in fresh from Holland. I did not cry. Years of therapy had taught me that my family's actions were about their own brokenness, not my worth. But I was done being a passive observer. I pulled out my laptop, logged into my firm's secure financial database, and searched for the Grand Solarium contracts for the upcoming weekend. It took less than 30 seconds to find the file. The total invoice was exactly $34,000. I scrolled down to the payment section. The initial deposit of $10,000 was paid via a credit card belonging to Jamal, Brittany's husband. Jamal is an arrogant vice president at a local venture capital firm who loves nothing more than flashing wealth he barely possesses. But it was the remaining balance of $24,000 that made my blood run cold. It was signed and guaranteed by my mother, Brenda. My parents are middle-class retirees. They do not have $24,000 lying around for a single night of partying. Something was incredibly wrong. I printed the invoice right there at the cafe using a portable wireless printer I carry for contracts. I folded the warm paper, slid it into my designer bag, and walked out into the rain. I drove my car straight to the affluent suburbs where I grew up. The sprawling two-story house looked exactly the same as it always did, with its perfectly manicured lawn and the expensive sports car parked in the driveway. I did not bother knocking. I unlocked the front door with the spare key I kept on my ring and walked straight into the kitchen. My mother, Brenda, was standing at the marble island casually flipping through a luxury home magazine while sipping a glass of iced lemon tea. She looked up, slightly annoyed by my sudden appearance. I did not say hello. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folded invoice, and slapped it down flat on the marble counter right over her magazine. She glanced at the Lumina PR letterhead, then at the bold $34,000 total, and finally at her own signature at the bottom of the page. I expected her to look guilty, or at least surprised that I had found out. Instead, she just sighed, picked up her tea, and looked at me with that familiar expression of exhausted pity. "You know, Lauren," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "it is very impolite to go digging into other people's finances. How did you even get this?" I ignored her question. "You and Dad dropped $24,000 on a birthday party for Brittany," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. "A party for our shared birthday. A party that I was not invited to." Brenda waved her hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, please do not start with the dramatics today. We can only afford one party this year. Jamal put down the deposit, and your father and I are helping out with the rest because it is important for Brittany's image. You are single, you live alone in an apartment in the city, and you do not have a high-profile network of friends to entertain. Brittany has a reputation to uphold. Just come by the venue at 10 o'clock after the main dinner is served. You can have a slice of cake. Do not make a scene." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. Come at 10 o'clock for a slice of cake. At my own birthday. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool marble. "This is not about affording one party, Mom," I said. "This is exactly what you did for our 21st birthday when you rented out a yacht for Brittany and told me I was too mature for parties, so you just gave me a $50 gift card. This is exactly what you did for our 25th when you flew her to Cabo and told me I was too independent and would probably rather just focus on my little office job. And our 30th. Do not even get me started on our 30th birthday, when you told the entire extended family I was out of the country on a business trip just so you would not have to explain why I was not at the country club." Brenda rolled her eyes. "You are always so resentful, Lauren. Brittany needs our support. She is married to a very important man now. Jamal is inviting the senior partners from his venture capital firm. This is a crucial networking event for his career. We could not exactly tell him we were splitting the budget to throw a modest dinner for you. You have always been the self-sufficient one. Why do you suddenly need us to hold your hand?" The irony of her calling me self-sufficient while essentially bankrolling my 33-year-old sister's vanity project was almost funny. But I was not laughing. I tapped the invoice on the counter. "Where did you get $24,000, Mom?" "I know for a fact Dad's pension does not cover luxury event spaces." Brenda's eyes darted away for a fraction of a second. It was a micro-expression, but I caught it. A brief flash of genuine panic before she masked it with her usual arrogant sneer. "That is none of your business," she snapped, suddenly defensive. "We manage our money just fine. Now, if you are just going to stand there and be jealous, I suggest you leave. I have an appointment for a hot stone massage in an hour." Before my mother could say another word about her massage appointment, the heavy oak door leading from the garage swung open. Heavy footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor, and in walked Jamal. At 35 years old, Jamal carried himself with the exaggerated swagger of a man who desperately needed everyone in the room to know his net worth before he even introduced himself. He was an African-American man with a sharp jawline and a meticulously groomed beard, wearing a custom-tailored navy blue suit that he probably put on just to run errands. As a vice president at a mid-tier venture capital firm here in Chicago, Jamal lived his entire life like he was pitching a startup. He was obsessed with climbing the corporate ladder and rubbing elbows with the city elite. He walked into the kitchen adjusting his expensive silk tie and stopped when he saw me standing across from my mother. The irritation on his face was immediate and unfiltered. "Well, look who decided to show up," Jamal said, his voice booming through the kitchen. He walked over and poured himself a glass of sparkling water from the refrigerator, completely ignoring the tension radiating off me. "Brenda, what is going on here? Why is she looking at us like we just stole her car?" My mother let out a long, dramatic sigh and rubbed her temples. She found out about the invoice for the Grand Solarium Jamal. She is throwing one of her typical fits because she thinks we should have split the money and thrown her a party too. You know how she gets. Always so focused on keeping score instead of supporting her sister. Jamal turned to look at me and let out a short, condescending laugh. He leaned against the marble island, crossing his arms over his chest. Are you serious right now, Lauren? You are 33 years old and you are crying over a birthday cake. He shook his head as if he found my very existence exhausting. Let me explain something to you since you clearly do not understand how the real world works. That $34,000 party is not just a party. It is a strategic investment. I put down a $10,000 deposit from my own pocket to secure that venue. Do you know why? Because it is an exclusive space, and I need an exclusive space to host the people who actually matter. I kept my face perfectly neutral. And who exactly matters, Jamal? I asked, my voice quiet. He smiled, the kind of smug, arrogant smile that made me want to push him into the swimming pool. The senior partners at my firm for starters, he said, taking a slow sip of his water. And more importantly, Harrison Cole. I do not expect you to know who that is, but Harrison is a billionaire investor. He is the key to my next promotion. I have been trying to get him to attend a social event of mine for 6 months. When I told him I was hosting a private gala at the Grand Solarium, he finally agreed to come. He is bringing 3 of his top executives. This night is going to solidify my position at the firm. I am using your sister's birthday as a cover for the most important networking event of my career. He stepped closer to me, looking me up and down with blatant judgment. My modest beige sweater and simple slacks clearly did not meet his standards of success. So you see, Lauren, this is not about you. This is about elevating our family status. My partners and my boss expect a certain level of sophistication. They expect to be surrounded by successful high-net-worth individuals. No offense, but my partners do not want to mingle with someone answering phones for a living. You would stick out like a sore thumb in that room. If you grind harder and actually apply yourself, maybe next year, you can afford your own cake. Until then, you need to stay out of the way and let the adults handle the real business. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I did not even defend my career. Instead, a slow, icy smile spread across my face. Jamal thought he was standing at the top of the world looking down at a pathetic receptionist. He thought his $10,000 deposit made him a king. He was utterly unaware of the massive secret I was withholding. Jamal thought I answered phones because I never talked about my work at family dinners. I never felt the need to brag. What he did not know was that Lumina Public Relations, the firm I founded and run as the chief executive officer, is the exact agency that Harrison Cole retains for all of his corporate communications. Just 3 weeks ago, Harrison sat across from me in my penthouse office drinking my scotch and asking for my advice on restructuring his investment portfolio image. Harrison respects me. He pays my firm a monthly retainer that is triple what Jamal makes in a year. More importantly, Harrison hates pretentious climbers. He hates people who use personal events to force business deals. If Harrison knew Jamal was using his own wife's birthday party as a desperate trap to corner him for a promotion, he would be disgusted. And if Harrison knew Jamal was actively insulting the very public relations CEO who manages his entire public image, Jamal would not just lose his promotion. He would be blacklisted from the Chicago financial district entirely. But I was not going to tell Jamal any of that. Not yet. I was going to let him dig his grave as deep as he possibly could. I looked at his smug face, and then at my mother, who was nodding along with every insulting word he said. They were so confident in their cruelty. They truly believed they had won. You are absolutely right, Jamal. I said, my voice smooth and agreeable. I would not want to embarrass you in front of Harrison Cole. I am sure he will be very impressed by your strategic investment. I hope the party is everything you deserve. Jamal smirked, thinking I was finally backing down and accepting my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. Glad we understand each other, he said, turning his back to me to finish his water. Do not forget to come by at 10 o'clock. We might have some leftover appetizers for you to take back to your apartment. I did not say another word. I simply picked up my leather bag and walked out of the kitchen. As I walked down the driveway toward my car, the rain had finally stopped. The air felt crisp and clear. Jamal and my mother thought they had just put me in my place. They thought they had secured their glamorous night of high society networking. But as I started my engine, I was already formulating my next move. They had no idea that I held the keys to the very kingdom they were trying to break into. The drive back to downtown Chicago gave me plenty of time to process what had just happened in my parents' kitchen. I watched the suburban houses fade into the rearview mirror and get replaced by the towering steel and glass skyscrapers of the city. Jamal and his arrogant speech replayed in my mind on an endless loop. He truly believed he was the smartest man in any room he walked into. He thought his mid-tier venture capital job gave him the right to speak to me like I was dirt on his custom-tailored shoes. And my mother just stood there nodding along, drinking her iced tea while he insulted my entire existence. It was a flawless demonstration of the toxic dynamic that had ruled my family for decades. Brittany was the golden child who could do no wrong, and I was the disappointment who simply existed to make them feel better about themselves. But as I pulled my car into the private underground parking garage of my office building, I did not feel sad. I felt a cold, sharp sense of clarity. The time for keeping my head down was officially over. I took the private executive elevator straight up to the top floor of the Lumina Public Relations building. When the polished metal doors slid open, I stepped into my true reality. The penthouse office was a massive open concept space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. My staff was busy coordinating high-level corporate events and managing crisis communications for global brands. I walked past the sleek glass conference rooms and gave a polite nod to my executive assistant, who handed me a stack of urgent messages. I walked into my corner office and closed the heavy oak door behind me, shutting out the noise of the busy agency. I tossed my leather bag onto the modern leather sofa and walked over to my massive mahogany desk. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and took a deep breath. The contrast between how my family saw me and who I actually was had never felt so stark. To Jamal, I was a pathetic receptionist who could not afford a birthday cake. In reality, I was sitting in an office that cost more per month than his annual mortgage. But I did not have time to sit around and bask in the irony. I had a very specific mission. I opened my laptop and woke up the secure server. As a top-tier public relations firm, we handle massive budgets for very powerful clients. Because of the sheer volume of money moving through our accounts, we use proprietary financial vetting software to ensure every vendor and client is legitimate. It is a necessary precaution to prevent money laundering and protect our corporate reputation. I opened the financial tracking program and pulled up the invoice for the Grand Solarium. I needed to understand exactly where Brenda and Richard got the money for that final payment. My parents were retired. My father Richard worked a comfortable corporate job for 30 years, but his pension was strictly budgeted to maintain their suburban lifestyle. They simply did not have $24,000 of disposable income sitting in a checking account, waiting to be blown on a single night of champagne and caviar. I typed my mother's name and the transaction authorization code into the search bar and hit enter. The software immediately began communicating with banking networks to trace the origin of the funds. I watched the green loading bar inch across the dark screen. The system cross-referenced public records, banking histories, and property data to build a complete profile of the transaction. For a few minutes, the only sound in my office was the soft hum of the air conditioning. Then the screen flashed, and the complete financial report populated on my monitor. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, and began to read the detailed breakdown. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. The $24,000 did not come from a savings account or a standard credit card. The money was drawn directly from a newly approved home equity line of credit, but it was not tied to my parents' suburban house. The address listed on the loan documents belonged to a commercial property located on the south side of the city. It was a property that had belonged to my late grandfather. When my grandfather passed away 5 years ago, he left that specific building in a joint trust to both Brittany and me. It was his way of ensuring his twin granddaughters would always have a financial safety net. According to the terms of his strict will, neither of us could sell, borrow against, or alter the property without the direct, explicit, and legally notarized consent of the other sister. It was an ironclad legal agreement designed to protect our shared asset. I scrolled down the digital document, staring at the details of the equity line. The loan had been approved just 2 weeks ago. The total amount borrowed was exactly $30,000. I kept scrolling until I reached the digital scans of the authorization signatures provided by the bank. There, at the bottom of the final page, was my mother's signature acting as a guarantor. Next to it was Brittany's signature. And right below that, on the line requiring my legal consent, was a signature that spelled out my name. It was a very convincing forgery. The loop of the L and the slant of the letters looked almost exactly like my handwriting. But I knew with absolute certainty that I had never signed that piece of paper. I had not even seen my grandfather's property documents in over 2 years. My family had deliberately and maliciously falsified my signature to secure a loan against my half of our inheritance. I sat back in my chair, completely stunned. This was no longer just a story about a family playing favorites. This was not about sibling rivalry or a petty argument over a birthday party guest list. My parents and my sister had crossed a massive legal boundary. By forging my signature to extract equity from a jointly owned property, they had committed federal financial fraud. They had stolen from me to fund a superficial networking event for Jamal. The sheer arrogance of their crime was breathtaking. They assumed I was too foolish and too disconnected to ever notice what they had done. They thought they could quietly drain the equity from my inheritance and hide behind the excuse of family loyalty if I ever found out. A slow and dangerous smile spread across my face. Jamal wanted to impress a billionaire at the upcoming party. My mother wanted to protect her golden child at all costs. They were all so desperate to look successful that they had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them. I reached for my phone and dialed the direct number for my corporate attorney. The birthday party was tomorrow night, and I was going to burn it to the ground completely right now. I sat in my office staring at the digital footprint of my family and their ultimate betrayal. The forged signature on the screen felt like a physical blow, but I refused to let it break me. I had built a multi-million-dollar public relations empire by mastering the art of crisis management. My parents and my sister thought they were dealing with a helpless receptionist. They had no idea they had just committed federal fraud against a woman who dismantled hostile corporate takeovers before her morning coffee. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. A lesser person would have called the police right then and there. A more emotional person would have driven back to that suburban house and screamed until her lungs gave out. But screaming would only give my mother the opportunity to play the victim. I did not want a screaming match. I wanted absolute and total destruction. I picked up my phone and bypassed the local authorities entirely. Instead, I called Thomas. Thomas is a senior partner at one of the most ruthless corporate law firms in Chicago. I pay him an exorbitant retainer because he does not ask unnecessary questions, and he executes my instructions with lethal precision. I told his assistant I needed an emergency meeting, and within 20 minutes I was walking out of my building and heading down the street to his high-rise office. My mind was racing with timelines and legal statutes. When I walked into his corner office, Thomas was already waiting at his massive oak desk. I handed him the printed dossier containing the invoice from the Grand Solarium, the background financial trace, and the falsified home equity loan documents showing my forged signature. I sat down in the leather chair across from him and watched his eyes scan the pages. The silence in the room was heavy as he processed the magnitude of what my family had done. Thomas is not a man who gets easily shocked, but I saw his jaw tighten as he compared my actual signature from my corporate file with the crude forgery on the loan agreement. "This is not just a family dispute, Lauren," he said, his voice completely serious. "This is severe financial fraud. They have illegally encumbered a jointly owned commercial property to extract $30,000. They committed identity theft and bank fraud. We need to contact the federal authorities and the bank fraud department immediately to freeze this line of credit and press charges. If we do this right now, we can have the police at your parents' house before dinner." I shook my head slowly. No, Thomas, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. We are not calling the police today. We are not calling the bank today. We are going to wait exactly 72 hours. Thomas looked at me like I had lost my mind. He leaned forward and reminded me that every hour we waited allowed them to spend more of the stolen funds. He warned me that delaying the report could complicate the investigation. But I held my ground. I explained to him exactly what that money was being used for. I told him about the $34,000 birthday party scheduled for tomorrow night. I told him about Jamal and his desperate plan to use the event to impress Harrison Cole and the senior partners at his venture capital firm. If we freeze the assets today, the venue will cancel the party before it even starts, I explained. My mother will cry and tell everyone that there was a banking error. Jamal will just reschedule his networking event and pretend nothing happened. They will spin the narrative and make themselves look like victims of a broken banking system. I refuse to give them that luxury. I want Jamal to walk into that venue tomorrow night believing he is the king of the world. I want my sister to put on her expensive dress and pose for the cameras. I want them to rack up the entire bill and feel the absolute peak of their fake success. Thomas slowly leaned back in his chair and a faint smile touched the corners of his mouth. He was beginning to understand the architecture of my revenge. It was not just about stopping them from spending the money. It was about letting them expose their true colors to the world before the floor completely collapsed beneath them. I instructed Thomas to prepare all the necessary legal documents immediately. I wanted the official police report drafted. I wanted the bank fraud notifications signed and ready to be filed. I wanted the asset freeze injunctions prepared for a judge. But I ordered him to hold every single piece of paper in his outbox until exactly 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. That was the morning after the party. By then, the money would be spent, the event would be over, and the venue would be trying to process the final $24,000 charge. When the bank received the fraud alert and froze the stolen funds, the payment would bounce in the most spectacular and public way possible. The venue would hold my parents and Jamal personally liable for theft of services. Thomas nodded in agreement and began drafting the paperwork right there while I sat in his office. I spent the next 2 hours signing sworn affidavits and legal declarations. Every signature I put on those papers felt like a brick being placed in the wall that would permanently separate me from my toxic family. There was a profound sense of peace in that room. The chaos they had brought into my life was being meticulously boxed up into neat legal files. When we were finally finished, Thomas stacked the folders and locked them in his desk drawer. The trap was set. I walked back to my office with a renewed sense of purpose. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from my mother reminding me to dress appropriately if I planned to show up for my slice of cake at 10 o'clock. I read the message and simply deleted it. I did not reply. Strategic silence is the most terrifying weapon you can use. They expect you to fight back so they can feed off your emotional reaction. By giving them absolute silence, you leave them completely blind to the threat rapidly approaching them. Now that the legal destruction was guaranteed, I had to focus on the professional destruction. Jamal wanted to use my birthday to elevate his career and impress the Chicago corporate elite. He thought he was playing chess, but he did not even realize I owned the board. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the contact list for my most exclusive clients. If Jamal wanted a high society networking event, I was going to give him one. But he was not going to be the host. I was going to orchestrate a parallel event so massive and so exclusive that it would completely eclipse his pathetic $34,000 party. I was going to hijack his entire guest list and leave him standing in an empty room. The silence in my office was replaced by the frantic typing on my keyboard as the real executive went to work. I left Thomas and his large stack of thick legal documents behind and walked the few short blocks back to my agency. The crisp Chicago air felt incredibly invigorating against my face. I had finally neutralized the financial threat, but the professional battlefield still needed to be prepared. Jamal was banking on my twin sister's 34th birthday party to be the networking event that secured his promotion. He genuinely believed that renting the Grand Solarium would make him look like a heavy hitter in the venture capital world. He wanted to play the game of high society optics. I was going to show him what it looked like when someone who actually owned the board decided to make a move. I stepped off the private elevator and walked directly to the center of the main bullpen where my senior event coordinators were working. I clapped my hands once to get their attention. The chatter immediately stopped, and half a dozen faces looked up at me. I told them we had a code red emergency booking for tomorrow night. I needed all hands on deck and an unlimited budget approved from my personal executive accounts. My lead coordinator, a brilliant woman named Rachel, asked what the occasion was. I smiled and told her we were hosting an ultra-exclusive tech and finance charity gala, and I told her exactly where it had to be. The Grand Solarium is located on the ground floor of a historic luxury building in the heart of the Gold Coast. It is beautiful, but it is still just the ground floor. It is where you put people who have money, but no real influence. The true crown jewel of that building is the rooftop penthouse. It is a private glass-enclosed architectural marvel that sits directly above the solarium, offering a 360-degree unobstructed view of the Chicago skyline and the dark waters of Lake Michigan. It is not open to the general public. You cannot just call a phone number and rent it with a $10,000 deposit. It is reserved exclusively for private charity galas and billionaire events. You must be a platinum corporate partner. Fortunately, Lumina Public Relations is their #1 corporate partner. I walked into my office and picked up the phone. I called the regional director of the property management group directly. I told him I needed the rooftop penthouse for tomorrow evening. He hesitated, explaining they normally require a 6-month notice to secure the penthouse. I did not argue. I simply reminded him that Lumina Public Relations was responsible for bringing them $3 million in corporate bookings last year alone. I offered a $50,000 premium for the short notice and promised my team would handle the logistics. The hesitation vanished instantly. He told me the penthouse was mine. With the venue secured, my team went into overdrive. I signed luxury vendor contracts as fast as Rachel printed them. I was not just throwing a party. I was constructing an impenetrable fortress of wealth and influence directly over my family's heads. I ordered a premium open bar featuring single malt scotches that cost more per bottle than Jamal spent on his entire tuxedo. I hired a Michelin-starred chef to set up interactive carving stations, completely eclipsing the standard catered dinners my mother selected. I booked a celebrated modern jazz quartet to provide the background ambiance. We brought in towering floral arrangements of rare white orchids that made the solarium flowers look like cheap grocery store bouquets. Every single detail was meticulously curated to scream absolute elite dominance. We even hired a specialized lighting firm to project our custom charity gala logo onto the side of the adjacent skyscraper. I was sparing no expense because this was not about money anymore. It was about logistical superiority. Jamal thought he could buy his way into the upper echelon of Chicago society by throwing a flashy party. But true wealth does not need to flash. True wealth floats silently above you and controls the entire atmosphere. I was using my massive hidden resources to literally and figuratively cast a massive shadow over my sister's fake high society debut. I even took a moment to carefully select the charity that this entire evening would benefit. I could have chosen any cause in the city, but I wanted something that carried a profound sense of poetic justice. All proceeds from the silent auction would go directly to a foundation providing legal aid for victims of familial financial fraud. It was a quiet private joke that only I would understand. While my mother and Jamal were downstairs spending $30,000 of stolen equity to stroke their own egos, I would be upstairs raising $500,000 to put people exactly like them behind bars. I pulled up the digital venue blueprints to study the exact layout. I wanted to control every single sightline. I instructed my production team to place our primary floral installations and our step and repeat photography wall right at the edge of the mezzanine that overlooked the downstairs courtyard. This meant that every time someone from Brittany's party walked out to get some fresh air or make a phone call, they would be forced to look up and see the blinding camera flashes and the overwhelming glamour of my gala looming over them. They would feel small. They would feel entirely insignificant. The geographical setup was the most satisfying part of my entire plan. To get to the Grand Solarium, Jamal and his guests would have to walk through the massive marble columns of the main lobby of the building. But right in the center of that lobby, dominating the main entrance, would be our velvet ropes and our elite security team directing the real VIPs to the private express elevators leading to the penthouse. Jamal's little birthday party was going to be completely eclipsed before his guests even checked their coats. Anyone attending his event would have to physically walk past my grand event check-in. They would see the heavy security, the velvet red carpet, and the endless stream of actual billionaires and tech titans bypassing them to go upstairs. It was a physical manifestation of my entire relationship with my family. For my whole life, they had pushed me down and tried to keep me on the ground floor. They had forged my name, stolen my equity, and insulted my career just so they could feel important for one night. Now I was going to literally sit above them in a glass castle that I built with my own hands. I looked out the massive glass window of my penthouse office as the autumn sun began to set over the city. I thought about Brittany picking up her $2,000 dress. I thought about Jamal standing in the mirror rehearsing his pathetic elevator pitches for his billionaire boss. They were all so blissfully ignorant of the massive financial and social storm that was gathering directly above them. Tomorrow night, they would learn exactly what happens when you try to crush someone who secretly owns the building. I turned my attention to the most critical phase of my plan. A beautiful venue is meaningless if the room is empty. Jamal was banking on his $34,000 party to be the ultimate networking mixer. He wanted to force his senior partners to look at him as a heavy hitter. But Jamal fundamentally misunderstood how power works in Chicago. You do not demand the attention of billionaires with a calendar invite to a birthday party. You command their attention by offering them exclusive access to a room they cannot buy their way into. I called Rachel, my lead coordinator, back into my office. I told Rachel to pull up the master database for Lumina Public Relations. As the premier communications agency in the city, we hold the keys to the most coveted guest lists in the Midwest. Our database is not just a collection of email addresses, it is a highly guarded vault of personal preferences, private phone numbers, and direct lines to the executive assistants of every major player in the financial district. I asked Rachel to isolate the venture capital sector and cross-reference it with Jamal's mid-tier firm. Within seconds, the screen populated with the names of every single senior partner and executive director at his company. Right at the very top of the list was the man Jamal was so desperate to impress, Harrison Cole. Harrison is not just a wealthy investor. He is a kingmaker. Where he goes, the rest of the financial district follows. I told Rachel to select Harrison and every single senior executive below him. Then I told her to expand the list to include the city top tech founders, real estate moguls, and media influencers. We were not just going to invite Jamal's bosses. We were going to invite the people his bosses wanted to network with. We built a guest list of exactly 200 names. It was a roster so concentrated with wealth and influence that a single conversation in that room could launch a $1 million company. Next, I gave Rachel the instructions for the physical invitations. We do not send emails for events of this magnitude. I authorized the use of our premium stationery reserve. We printed 200 heavy cardstock invitations pressed with brilliant gold foil detailing the Tech and Finance Charity Gala. The invitations did not mention a birthday. They did not mention my family. They simply stated that Lumina Public Relations was hosting an exclusive evening of high-level networking and philanthropy in the rooftop penthouse. To ensure maximum impact, I instructed my team to have the invitations hand-delivered by private couriers directly to the executive offices of our guests. The execution was flawless. By noon, the private couriers were dispatching across the city carrying the gold foil envelopes directly to their destinations. This is where the true power of my agency came into play. If Jamal sent an invitation to Harrison Cole, an assistant would throw it in the trash. Jamal is a mid-level vice president. His social capital is practically zero. But when an invitation arrives bearing the Lumina Public Relations watermark, it is handed directly to the boss. My agency is known as the ultimate gatekeeper of the Chicago corporate elite. People know that if they miss one of our events, they are missing out on millions of dollars in potential deals. I sat at my desk and watched the digital tracker on my computer screen. It did not take long. The responses started rolling in less than an hour after the first courier made a delivery. The word yes began lighting up the screen in a rapid cascade of green notifications. Jamal's direct supervisor confirmed. The managing director of the firm confirmed. The heads of 3 rival venture capital firms confirmed. They were all canceling their existing Friday night plans to attend my gala. They had no idea they were actively abandoning Jamal's pathetic little party downstairs. Then my private office phone rang. It was my direct line. I picked up the receiver and heard the deep, gravelly voice of Harrison Cole himself. He had bypassed my staff to call me personally. Harrison thanked me for the beautiful invitation and asked if he could bring 2 of his international investors who happened to be flying into the city that evening. I smiled and told him I would have my security team add their names to the absolute VIP list and escort them through the private lobby. Harrison told me he was looking forward to catching up and discussing his new portfolio over a glass of vintage scotch. He sounded genuinely excited. He did not mention Jamal. He did not mention a birthday party in the solarium. Jamal was completely off his radar. When I hung up the phone, the digital tracker on my screen hit 100%. Every single person on the 200-person guest list had confirmed their attendance. I had successfully weaponized my professional network. I was systematically dismantling Jamal's entire guest list and sucking all the oxygen out of his event without him ever suspecting a thing. I imagined him sitting in his small cubicle, nervously checking his phone, waiting for someone to reply to his cheap digital birthday invitations. He had probably spent hours crafting the perfect email subject line, desperately hoping to sound important without sounding needy. He probably thought his bosses were just playing hard to get because they were busy executives. He probably assumed they would all magically show up at the solarium at the last minute to drink cheap champagne and listen to his poorly rehearsed elevator pitch about synergy and market growth. He was wrong. He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he never bothered to learn what I actually did for a living. If he had ever paid attention, he would have known better than to challenge me in the arena of social optics. But toxic people like Jamal and my mother do not see the people around them as actual human beings with full lives. They see us as props in their own personal movies. They thought I was a failed prop that they could safely discard. They were about to learn that the prop they pushed aside was actually the director of the entire production. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of my coffee. The logistical trap was now perfectly set. The financial trap was locked in the desk of my lawyer waiting to spring on Sunday morning. The penthouse was booked and the guest list was completely hijacked. There was nothing left to do but pick out a dress and get a good night of sleep. Tomorrow was my 33rd birthday. For the first time in my life, I was actually looking forward to celebrating. My family had spent 3 decades trying to keep me in the dark so my sister could shine. They stole my money and insulted my career just to maintain their superiority. But tomorrow night, the spotlight was going to be blinding. They were going to watch their fake empire crumble. And they had absolutely nowhere to hide. Friday evening arrived with a chilling autumn breeze sweeping off Lake Michigan. At exactly 8 o'clock, the heavy brass doors of the Grand Solarium swung open to welcome the elite guests of Brittany's 33rd birthday gala. The venue was undeniably breathtaking. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the polished marble floors. A custom caviar bar, carved entirely from ice, sat perfectly illuminated in the center of the room. Brittany stood near the entrance wearing a $2,000 emerald silk gown that she had spent 3 hours having fitted. She held a glass of champagne and practiced her surprise smile for the photographers she had hired. There was only one problem. The cavernous, magnificent room was completely empty. Aside from my parents and a few of Brittany's superficial friends from her yoga studio, nobody else had arrived. The hired caterers stood in uncomfortable silence by the buffet tables, shifting their weight and staring at the untouched food. The photographer took a few awkward photos of Brittany posing next to an empty floral arch before retreating to a corner to check his phone. Brenda paced back and forth, adjusting the napkins on the tables and muttering about Chicago traffic. Jamal was standing near the coat check, completely ignoring his wife. He was aggressively refreshing his email and staring at his phone screen. He had spent $10,000 of his own money and $24,000 of stolen equity to secure this exact moment. He had expected to walk in and see Harrison Cole and the senior partners of his venture capital firm waiting to shake his hand. Instead, he was listening to the embarrassing echo of his own dress shoes tapping on the empty marble floor. The silence in the solarium was deafening. It was the sound of a fake empire failing to launch. It was truly pathetic. Exactly 400 feet directly above them, a completely different reality was unfolding. The doors to the private express elevators opened directly into the rooftop penthouse, and the atmosphere was electric. The moment guests stepped off the elevator, they were enveloped in the sophisticated energy of my tech and finance charity gala. The penthouse was a masterpiece of modern architecture, featuring floor-to-ceiling glass walls that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the illuminated city skyline. I stood near the entrance wearing a custom-tailored black velvet gown that whispered elegance without needing to scream for attention. I did not have to practice a fake smile because the joy I felt was completely authentic. It felt amazing. The room was vibrating with the low, steady hum of high-profile networking. 200 of the most powerful people in the Midwest were mingling under the soft glow of custom-projected lighting. Waiters in pristine white jackets moved flawlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays of seared Wagyu beef and truffle risotto. The modern jazz quartet I had hired played a smooth, rhythmic melody that perfectly complemented the clinking of crystal glasses. The towering arrangements of rare white orchids framed the room, creating an atmosphere of absolute elite dominance. To my right, the founder of a massive tech startup was enthusiastically discussing a merger with a real estate mogul. To my left, a group of prominent media influencers were live streaming the silent auction tables, driving the charity bids higher and higher. This was not a desperate attempt to look important. This was the actual epicenter of power in the city. The visual contrast between the two parties was a perfect reflection of how my family and I lived our lives. Brittany and Jamal built their entire existence on the illusion of success. They bought expensive clothes they could not afford and threw parties with money they had to steal just to create a single photograph that made them look wealthy. Downstairs, Brittany was practically in tears because her audience had not shown up to validate her. Her $2,000 gown looked tragic in the context of an empty room. She was furious that her perfect night was falling apart, but she had no idea why. She just assumed people were running late. Upstairs, I was experiencing the exact opposite. I had spent years building a genuine foundation of hard work, late nights, and strategic brilliance. I did not need to beg these billionaires to show up. They came because they respected my mind and valued the empire I had quietly constructed. I walked through the crowd greeting my clients by their first names and introducing rival investors who had been trying to secure a meeting with each other for months. Every handshake and every shared laugh was a testament to the authentic life I had created. I did not need a spotlight because I owned the entire power grid. As the clock moved toward 8:30, the desperation downstairs began to curdle into genuine panic. Jamal abandoned his spot by the coat check and began aggressively pacing near the bar. He ordered a double scotch and snapped at the bartender. His custom navy suit suddenly looked tight and uncomfortable. He dialed the number of his direct supervisor, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried texting 3 different junior partners at his firm, but received absolute silence in return. He looked over at Brittany, who was now angrily arguing with Brenda about the lighting. The perfect image Jamal had tried so hard to manufacture was crumbling right in front of him. Meanwhile, in the penthouse, the elevator doors opened once more and the room seemed to naturally part. Harrison Cole walked in wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, accompanied by his 2 international guests. He spotted me across the room and his face broke into a wide, genuine smile. He bypassed several eager executives who tried to catch his eye and walked directly over to me. He shook my hand warmly and congratulated me on orchestrating such a magnificent evening. He told me that my charity gala was the only event in the city worth attending tonight. He did not know that his mid-level vice president was standing exactly 4 floors below us, sweating through his shirt and staring at an empty door. The geographical proximity of the two events made the victory incredibly sweet. I could look out the massive glass windows of the penthouse and see the dark courtyard far below me. I knew exactly where my toxic family was, and I knew exactly what they were experiencing. For 33 years, they had celebrated Brittany's birthday while treating me like a disposable afterthought. They had locked me out of their picture-perfect family portrait. But tonight the tables were completely and permanently turned. They were trapped in a beautiful cage of their own making, surrounded by expensive food nobody wanted to eat, and listening to the silence of their own irrelevance. I stood at the top of the city, raising a glass of vintage champagne, with a billionaire knowing that the storm I had orchestrated was just beginning to break over their heads. None of them had even bothered to text me happy birthday today. It was the greatest gift they could have ever given me because it confirmed that walking away was the best decision of my life. Downstairs in the Grand Solarium, the atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable anticipation to suffocating tension. It was now approaching 9 o'clock, and the massive crystal chandeliers seemed to mock the absolute emptiness of the room. Jamal was standing near the towering ice sculpture at the center of the caviar bar, but he was not admiring the craftsmanship. He was sweating. The custom-tailored navy blue suit that had made him feel like an absolute king just an hour ago now felt like a suffocating straitjacket. He ran a trembling finger inside his starched white collar, trying to discreetly wipe away the thick moisture gathering at the base of his neck. His expensive leather shoes tapped a frantic, irregular rhythm against the polished marble floor. Every time the heavy brass doors of the venue creaked or a waiter dropped a piece of silverware. Jamal snapped his head toward the entrance, expecting to see the silver hair of Harrison Cole or the familiar faces of his venture capital partners. But every single time, the doors remained stubbornly closed or revealed only another bored catering staff member carrying a tray of untouched appetizers. The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums and made it impossible to think about anything else. Across the massive room, Brittany was throwing a spectacular tantrum. She had completely abandoned her practiced smiles and was aggressively confronting the venue manager about the lighting and the temperature of the room. Her $2,000 emerald silk gown swished angrily as she paced back and forth, demanding to know why her perfect night felt like a ghost town. Brenda was trailing right behind her, trying to soothe her golden child with empty reassurances about Chicago traffic and late working executives. Jamal watched them with a growing sense of profound disgust. He did not care about Brittany's birthday. He never cared about the beautiful flowers, or the classical music, or the expensive dress. He only cared about the leverage this party was supposed to give him. He had convinced himself that this $34,000 investment would be the ultimate power play. He imagined himself casually sipping scotch with Harrison Cole, pointing out the elegant decor and securing his promotion to senior partner with a confident handshake. Instead, he was standing completely alone next to a melting ice sculpture, watching his wife scream at a tired teenager holding a clipboard. Jamal pulled his phone from his pocket for what felt like the 100th time. The bright screen illuminated his tense face. Nothing. No new messages. No missed calls. He opened his text thread with Harrison Cole. Earlier that afternoon, he had sent a carefully crafted message reminding his boss about the party and mentioning the premium open bar. It had been marked as read at 4 o'clock. Nothing since. He opened his group chat with the 3 other junior partners he had invited. He had sent them a casual message an hour ago, saying the champagne was flowing and asking where they were. Absolute silence. He felt a cold knot of genuine panic forming in the pit of his stomach. In the cutthroat world of Chicago venture capital, being ignored is far worse than being fired. If your boss yells at you, it means you still matter enough to be corrected. If your boss simply ignores your invitation to a private gala, it means you have completely ceased to exist on their professional radar. Jamal was rapidly realizing that he was completely invisible to the powerful men he was desperately trying to impress. Unable to stand still any longer, Jamal marched over to the main bar. The bartender, a young man in a pristine white jacket, was polishing a glass and looking incredibly bored. "Pour me a double scotch." Jamal ordered, his voice much sharper and louder than he intended. "Neat. Make it the most expensive bottle you have." The bartender nodded smoothly and poured the amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass. Jamal grabbed the drink and swallowed half of it in one massive gulp. The alcohol burned its way down his throat, but it did absolutely nothing to quiet the frantic beating of his heart. He leaned heavily against the polished mahogany bar, staring at his pathetic reflection in the mirrored wall behind the liquor bottles. He looked truly desperate. His eyes were wide, and a visible sheen of sweat coated his forehead. He took a deep breath, trying to force himself to calm down. He told himself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe a massive pileup on the interstate was blocking traffic. Maybe Harrison had called an emergency board meeting that ran incredibly late. Yes, that had to be it. An emergency meeting. They would all walk through those doors any minute, laughing about the delay and apologizing for keeping him waiting. Just as Jamal was convincing himself of this comforting lie, the heavy brass doors finally swung open. Jamal's heart leaped into his throat. He put his drink down and quickly smoothed the lapels of his jacket, slapping on his most confident, charismatic smile. He stepped forward, ready to welcome his billionaire boss. But the man who walked through the door was not Harrison Cole. It was not a senior partner or even a junior partner. It was an associate named Greg. Greg was a 25-year-old kid fresh out of business school who spent his days crunching spreadsheets in a windowless cubicle at the very bottom of the firm hierarchy. Jamal had invited him as an afterthought, purely to pad the guest list and have someone to fetch drinks if the senior partners needed anything. Greg walked into the massive, empty solarium looking utterly confused. He was wearing a slightly wrinkled gray suit and holding a modest gift bag. He looked around the cavernous room, taking in the untouched caviar, the bored staff, and the angry woman pacing in the corner. Then he spotted Jamal standing by the bar. Jamal felt a sickening wave of disappointment, but he quickly masked it. He walked over to Greg, forcing a loud, enthusiastic laugh. "Greg, my man," he boomed, clapping the younger guy heavily on the shoulder. "Glad you could make it. Grab a drink, the bar is fully stocked. Where is everyone else? Did Harrison keep you guys late at the office?" Greg shifted uncomfortably, clearly taken aback by the aggressive greeting. He looked at Jamal, and then glanced nervously around the empty room again. "What do you mean, Jamal?" he asked, his voice tentative. "Nobody was at the office. I left at 5. I just came from my apartment." Jamal felt the fake smile freeze entirely on his face. The knot in his stomach twisted violently. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice dropping its friendly tone. "Where are the partners? Where is Harrison? I invited the entire executive team. They all confirmed. Where are they?" Greg took a step back, intimidated by the sudden intense hostility radiating from Jamal. He looked at Jamal like he was completely out of his mind. "You really do not know?" Greg asked. "Know what?" Jamal snapped, his patience completely evaporating. "Spit it out, Greg. Where is Harrison Cole?" Greg swallowed hard and adjusted his grip on the little paper gift bag. "They are upstairs, Jamal. All of them. Harrison, the senior partners, the managing directors. Everyone is upstairs." Jamal stared at him, the words not fully computing in his panicked brain. "Upstairs," he repeated blankly. "What is upstairs?" Greg pointed a trembling finger toward the ceiling. "In the penthouse," he explained. "Lumina Public Relations is hosting some massive invite-only tech and finance charity gala tonight. It is the absolute biggest networking event of the entire year. The invitations went out yesterday morning, and apparently, it is a total power room. Harrison got a personal invite from the chief executive officer of Lumina. I saw them all walking into the private express elevator in the main lobby when I came in. I thought you knew. I thought maybe you scheduled your party down here hoping to catch them on their way out or something. The words hit Jamal with the devastating force of a physical blow. The air rushed entirely out of his lungs. He stumbled back a half step, his expensive leather shoes scraping loudly against the marble floor. Upstairs. They were upstairs. The entire executive team, the billionaire investor, the men who held the keys to his entire future. They were literally directly above his head, drinking better champagne, rubbing elbows with real billionaires, and attending an exclusive gala hosted by the most powerful public relations firm in the city. And he was not invited. Worse, they had all received their invitations yesterday and actively chosen to ignore his pathetic little birthday party to attend the real event. Jamal looked around the grand solarium. Suddenly, the beautiful room looked like a glittering, expensive tomb. The massive crystal chandeliers, the custom ice sculpture, the $2,000 dress his wife was wearing. It was all completely worthless. It was a spectacular, humiliating joke. He had drained his own bank account and manipulated his in-laws into committing federal mortgage fraud to steal $24,000 from an estranged sister, just to throw a party that absolutely nobody cared about. Jamal felt the room begin to spin out of control. The classical jazz music playing softly through the venue's speakers sounded exactly like a funeral dirge. He looked at Greg, who was watching him with a mixture of pity and profound secondhand embarrassment. Greg knew. A 25-year-old associate was standing in this empty room, realizing that his vice president was a complete fraud with zero social capital. Jamal's reputation at the firm was not just damaged, it was completely destroyed. By Monday morning, the entire office would know that Jamal threw a desperate $34,000 networking party on the ground floor while the real executives were partying in the penthouse directly above him. They would laugh at him relentlessly behind his back. Harrison Cole would never promote a man who possessed such a pathetic lack of self-awareness. The $34,000 investment was not just burning to the ground. It was completely incinerating his entire career, taking his pride, his marriage, and his financial stability down with it into the ashes. Jamal turned away from Greg, unable to look the younger man in the eye. He walked slowly back to the mahogany bar. His shoulders slumped, his tailored suit feeling heavier than lead. He picked up his empty crystal glass and stared at the melting ice cubes resting at the bottom. He was completely trapped. There was no way out. The ultimate power play had just become the ultimate inescapable trap. Downstairs in the grand solarium, the atmosphere was suffocating. Jamal stood frozen at the mahogany bar. The words Greg had spoken echoed in his mind. The entire executive team was upstairs in the penthouse. Panic had initially gripped him, but in the mind of an arrogant narcissist, panic rarely lasts. It quickly twisted into indignant rage. Jamal refused to believe he had been outsmarted. Jamal convinced himself Harrison was sitting upstairs wondering where his favorite vice president was. Jamal decided he was not going to stand in an empty room. He belonged in the penthouse. He slammed his crystal glass down. Jamal adjusted his custom suit jacket and marched directly across the cavernous room toward his wife and mother-in-law. Brittany was complaining to Brenda about the ruined birthday aesthetic. Jamal grabbed Brittany by the arm. "We are leaving this room," he snapped. Brittany looked at him in shock. "What do you mean we are leaving?" she demanded. "This is my birthday party." Jamal leaned in close, his eyes wide and frantic. "Listen to me, Brittany. My entire executive team is upstairs right now at a massive charity event in the penthouse. Harrison Cole is there. This is our chance. We are going to go up to the penthouse, walk right in, and show them we are part of the elite crowd." Brenda gasped. "Oh, Jamal, that is brilliant," she said, her eyes lighting up. "We will just tell them we are important guests. With Brittany's beautiful dress, they will assume we belong there. Let us go." The three of them marched out of the dead-silent grand solarium and stepped into the massive marble lobby of the building. The contrast was staggering. While their side of the building was a ghost town, the center of the lobby was a hive of glamorous activity. A plush red carpet was rolled out leading directly to the private express elevators. Tall stanchions with thick velvet ropes created a secure perimeter. The area was buzzing with actual billionaires waiting in a polite line to check their coats and display their digital invitations. Security personnel in sharp black suits quietly stood watch. Jamal puffed out his chest and led the women straight toward the front of the line, bypassing a group of prominent real estate developers. He felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the moment he would walk past the velvet rope and secure his place among the Chicago elite. Jamal approached the velvet rope with a confident swagger. The head of security, a massive man with broad shoulders, stepped forward. He smoothly unhooked the rope and held it across his body to block their path. "Good evening, sir." The security guard said, his voice deep and polite, but entirely firm. "I need to see your digital invitations before you proceed to the express elevator." Jamal let out a condescending chuckle and waved his hand dismissively. "We do not need digital invitations," Buddy Jamal said, using a patronizing tone. "I am a vice president. I am here to meet Harrison Cole. He is a billionaire investor, and he is expecting me upstairs. Just let us through so we do not keep him waiting." Jamal took a step forward, fully expecting the guard to drop the rope. But the massive guard did not move a single muscle. He stood firmly planted like a solid brick wall. "I apologize, sir," the guard replied, his tone completely unchanged. "But this is a highly secured private event. Nobody gets past this checkpoint without an official Lumina public relations invitation. If you are not on the guest list, you are not getting into the elevator." Jamal felt his face grow hot. His wife and his mother-in-law were watching him. The actual billionaires standing in line behind him were starting to whisper and stare. His manufactured confidence was instantly replaced by hot, humiliating anger. He leaned forward, invading the guard's personal space. "Listen to me very closely," Jamal hissed. "You are making a massive mistake. I am not some random guy off the street. Harrison Cole is my direct supervisor. If you do not let me up there right now, I will personally make sure you lose your job. I will call the property manager and have you fired before midnight. Let us through right now." The head of security did not flinch. He simply looked at Jamal, the way one might look at a very annoying insect. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a sleek silver iPad. He tapped the screen a few times, pulling up the master database for the charity gala. "Let us see," the guard said calmly. "What is your exact name, sir?" Jamal stood up straight, puffing out his chest again. "Jamal," he barked loudly, making sure the people in line could hear. "And this is my wife Brittany and her mother Brenda. Check the official list right now. You will see we belong upstairs." The guard tapped the screen again, and his eyes scanned the digital document. He stopped scrolling and looked back up at Jamal. A cold, hard expression settled over the guard's features. "Well, sir, I have checked the master database," the guard said, his voice loud enough to echo slightly in the marble lobby. "Your name is indeed in our system." Jamal smirked and turned to look at Brittany. He turned right back to the guard. "See, I told you," Jamal said. "Now open the velvet rope up." But the guard did not unhook the velvet rope. Instead, he stepped even closer to Jamal, backing him away from the entrance. "I am not opening the rope, sir," the guard said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "You are in the system, but you are not on the guest list. You and your party have been explicitly placed on a strict, do not admit list by the host of this event. Under no circumstances are you to be allowed anywhere near the penthouse." Jamal stared at the security guard, completely paralyzed. The words echoed in his brain. Do not admit list. He was not just omitted from the guest list. He had been specifically targeted and banned. Brittany gasped loudly, covering her mouth. Brenda stumbled backward, looking terrified. Jamal tried to speak, but his throat was completely dry. "Who?" Jamal managed to choke out, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and confusion. "Who put me on a do not admit list? I want to speak to the host right now. The head of security smiled a very cold, tight smile. The host will not be coming down to speak with you, sir, the guard replied. She was very clear that you would try to crash her event. I strongly suggest you return to your own party right now before I call the police and have you removed. Jamal was completely and utterly destroyed. The powerful executives standing in line behind him were openly pointing and laughing. He had arrogantly tried to pull rank, and he had been publicly humiliated in front of the exact people he so desperately wanted to impress. At this exact moment, he felt like absolutely nothing at all. Jamal stood frozen before the velvet rope, unable to process his absolute humiliation. The security guard had just informed him he was on a strict do not admit list. Behind him, wealthy tech founders and investors were growing restless. A few openly whispered at the man who loudly tried to bully his way into an exclusive gala. Brittany tugged at Jamal's sleeve, her face flushed with anger. She felt the judging stares of the Chicago elite bearing down on her emerald dress. Brenda fluttered nervously behind them, completely out of her depth. Jamal opened his mouth to salvage his dignity, but no words came out. And then a very soft, elegant chime echoed through the marble lobby. The polished steel doors of the private express elevator slid smoothly open. Soft golden light spilled onto the plush red carpet. Jamal, Brittany, and Brenda all turned their heads toward the sound. What they saw completely shattered whatever fragile reality they still clung to. I stepped out of the elevator. I was wearing a custom-tailored black velvet designer gown that draped perfectly across my shoulders and swept the floor. I held a crystal flute of vintage champagne. My hair was styled in sleek waves, and my makeup was flawless. I did not look like the quiet sister who lived in a basic apartment. I looked like a powerful, confident woman who owned the room before stepping fully into it. Right beside me, walking shoulder to shoulder, was Harrison Cole. The billionaire investor wore a dark charcoal suit that screamed old money and absolute authority. He held his own glass of champagne and leaned toward me, laughing loudly at a joke I had just made about a mutual client. Harrison looked relaxed and genuinely happy to be in my company. We looked like two equal titans of industry sharing a private moment away from the charity gala upstairs. As we stepped past the elevator doors, Harrison placed a polite hand on my shoulder. We stopped right on the other side of the velvet rope, directly facing the security checkpoint. Jamal stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. He looked from my designer gown to my crystal flute and then directly at the face of his ultimate boss. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He tried to take a step back, but the crowd blocked his escape. He was trapped. He finally realized that the quiet sister he mocked all week was standing shoulder to shoulder with the man who held his entire career in the palm of his hand. But Brittany did not understand the corporate dynamics at play. She only saw her boring sister ruining her aesthetic, her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure jealousy and rage. She completely abandoned all high society manners. "What are you doing here?" Brittany shrieked, her shrill voice slicing through the murmurs of the lobby. She lunged forward, hitting the velvet rope with her stomach. "You're supposed to be downstairs eating cake. How did you sneak into this building?" I did not flinch. I did not drop my smile. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my vintage champagne and looked at her. My silence only made her angrier. Brittany pointed a shaking finger at me and turned to the security guard. "Why is she up there?" Brittany demanded, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "She is just a receptionist. She lives in a tiny apartment. She does not belong at a gala. She probably snuck in through the service elevator to steal food. You need to kick her out right now and let us in. This is my birthday and she is ruining everything." Brenda stepped forward, emboldened by Brittany's hysterical outburst. She looked at me with a mixture of confusion and deep disappointment. "Lauren, what on earth are you wearing?" Brenda scolded, treating me like a disobedient teenager in front of Chicago high society. "Where did you get that dress? You are embarrassing our family in front of all these important people. Come out from behind that rope right now and go back downstairs. You are confusing the security staff and upsetting Jamal's boss." The contrast between us could not have been more stark. There they were, my toxic family sweating and screaming on the public side of the velvet rope covered in cheap perfume and desperate ambition. And there I was, standing on the exclusive side, bathed in soft light, holding expensive champagne, and remaining absolutely silent. I did not need to raise my voice to defend myself. I did not need to explain my dress or my apartment or my career. I simply let the silence stretch out, allowing the wealthy guests to witness their complete lack of class. Harrison Cole stopped laughing. The warm smile vanished from his face, replaced by an expression of cold, calculating disgust. He lowered his champagne flute and took a half step forward, placing himself slightly in front of me in a protective gesture. He looked at Brittany as if she were a wild animal that had somehow wandered into a fine dining restaurant. Then his sharp gray eyes slowly slid over to Jamal. Jamal was practically shaking. He looked like he wanted the marble floor to crack open and swallow him whole. Harrison looked Jamal up and down, taking in the cheap sweat on his forehead and the panicked look in his eyes. Jamal Harrison said, his voice remarkably quiet, but carrying a weight that made the entire lobby fall completely silent. "What exactly is going on here? Why is this woman screaming at my host?" Jamal swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down, but his throat was too dry to produce a sound. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then opened it again. Sir Jamal finally choked out, "Mr. Cole, I am so sorry. This is my wife, Brittany, and my mother-in-law. They did not mean to cause a scene. We were coming upstairs to say hello." Harrison raised a single gray eyebrow. "Coming upstairs to say hello," Harrison repeated, dripping with absolute contempt. "You are not on the guest list, Jamal. This is an exclusive private charity gala, not a public bar, and you bring a woman who shrieks at my host and calls her a receptionist. Is this how you conduct yourself in professional settings? Is this the type of judgment you exercise representing my firm?" I stood perfectly still next to Harrison, watching the utter and complete destruction of Jamal's ego. I took another slow, delicious sip of my vintage champagne. I did not say a single word to my sister or my mother, because I did not have to. I had meticulously built this corporate arena and invited the most powerful gladiators in the city. Brittany stood frozen at the velvet rope, her jaw hanging open in shock as she processed the terrifying words Harrison had spoken. He had just called me his host. He was actively defending me. The spoiled golden child was finally realizing that her glamorous world was built on shifting sand and a tidal wave had just rolled in. The heavy silence in the marble lobby felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Jamal had just stammered out his pathetic excuse, calling his own wife and mother-in-law an accidental disruption while simultaneously trying to suck up to the billionaire investor standing beside me. Harrison Cole did not look amused. He did not look sympathetic. He looked at Jamal with the kind of profound disgust usually reserved for something foul stuck to the bottom of an expensive shoe. Harrison shifted his weight and took another deliberate step forward, placing himself squarely between me and the velvet rope. He was a man who commanded boardrooms with just a glance, and right now all of his formidable corporate authority was laser-focused entirely on Jamal. The wealthy guests, standing in line behind Jamal, collectively held their breath, sensing the absolute destruction that was about to unfold. Harrison slowly shook his head, his silver hair catching the warm glow of the lobby chandeliers. "You came upstairs to say hello?" Harrison repeated, his voice dripping with icy sarcasm. "You thought you could just wander up to the most exclusive charity gala of the year uninvited and demand entry by dropping my name. That is not ambition, Jamal. That is pure, unadulterated delusion. I have worked with aggressive venture capitalists all my life, but I have never seen such a breathtaking display of unprofessional arrogance." Jamal shrank back as if he had been physically struck. He opened his mouth to apologize again, but Harrison raised a single hand, silencing him instantly. "Do not speak," Harrison commanded. "You have already embarrassed yourself and my firm enough for one evening. Now you are going to stand there and listen. You clearly have no idea who you are talking to. You called this woman a receptionist. You allowed your wife to shriek at her like she was the help. Harrison turned slightly and gestured toward me with deep professional respect. Allow me to formally introduce you to Lauren. She is not a guest who sneaked into this building. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Lumina Public Relations. She is the mastermind who single-handedly orchestrated this entire gala. She manages the public image and crisis communications for my entire financial portfolio. The men and women standing in line behind you right now are here because she summoned them. This is her building tonight. This is her event. She holds more power in her little finger than you will ever hold in your entire miserable career. The words hit the marble floor like heavy lead weights. Jamal stood completely paralyzed. His jaw literally dropped open. His eyes darted frantically from Harrison to me and back to Harrison again, trying to find some sign that this was an elaborate, cruel joke. But there was no joke. The reality was crashing down on him with the force of a freight train. The quiet sister he had mocked in the kitchen just yesterday, the woman he told to grind harder so she could afford her own cake, was actually the multi-million-dollar chief executive officer his own boss bowed down to. His knees visibly buckled, and he had to grab the brass stanchion holding the velvet rope just to stay on his feet. The sweat on his forehead was now pouring down his face, ruining his custom-tailored suit. Next to him, Brittany looked like she was going to pass out. Her perfect blonde hair suddenly looked dull against the stark terror in her eyes. The golden child was finally realizing that the sister she had spent her entire life stepping on was actually standing on top of a mountain she could never even hope to climb. Brenda covered her face with her hands, whimpering softly as the judging eyes of the Chicago elite burned into her back. They had tried to make me feel small, and instead they had walked straight into a spotlight that exposed their absolute insignificance to the entire world. For the first time since stepping off the elevator, I finally spoke. I did not raise my voice. I did not sound angry. I sounded like a woman who was completely and utterly in charge. Harrison, I said, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Thank you for the kind introduction. But we should not waste any more of your valuable time on party crashers. Our guests are waiting for you upstairs. Harrison looked at me, his expression softening immediately into one of warm respect. You are absolutely right, Lauren, he said, offering me his arm. I will see you in the penthouse. He turned his back on Jamal without another word and walked toward the express elevator, entirely dismissing Jamal from his existence. I turned my attention to the massive security guard who was still holding the velvet rope firmly in place. I looked him dead in the eye and gave my final order. Escort them back down to the basement, I instructed, my voice ringing crystal clear across the lobby. Make sure they do not attempt to bother our real guests again. We do not want the VIPs smelling their desperation. The security guard nodded sharply with a look of intense satisfaction. Yes, he replied. I watched as the guard stepped forward, unhooked the velvet rope, and physically corralled my toxic family. Jamal, Brittany, and Brenda were too humiliated to even speak. They turned around and began the long, agonizing walk of shame back toward the empty Grand Solarium. The crowd of billionaires and tech founders actually parted to let them through, whispering and laughing as they passed. It was a flawless execution. I stood by the elevator holding my champagne and watched them disappear down the hallway. They had wanted a high society moment, and I had given them one they would never forget. It was the perfect ending to the first part of my plan, and I was just getting started with the rest of my revenge. The long walk from the main lobby back to the Grand Solarium felt like a funeral march. Jamal, Brittany, and Brenda did not say a single word to each other as they pushed through the heavy brass doors of the empty venue. The contrast between the vibrant energy of the penthouse and the cavernous dead silence of their own party was physically sickening. It was now past 11 o'clock. The catering staff had given up all pretense of staying busy and were openly leaning against the walls checking their phones. The massive custom caviar bar had melted into a sad puddle of water, soaking the expensive linen tablecloths. The modern classical music playing softly through the overhead speakers only emphasized the absolute emptiness of the room. Jamal walked straight to the closest table and collapsed heavily into a chair, burying his face in his hands. His custom-tailored suit felt like a cheap costume. The absolute humiliation of being dressed down by Harrison Cole in front of the Chicago elite was playing on a continuous loop in his mind. He had gambled his entire professional reputation on this night, and he had lost everything in less than 5 minutes. Brittany paced back and forth across the marble floor, her $2,000 emerald gown dragging sadly behind her. She was no longer angry. She was completely and utterly broken inside. She kept looking up at the ceiling, knowing that directly above her the sister she had bullied her entire life was holding court with billionaires. Brenda sat at a table staring blankly at an untouched plate of expensive appetizers. For decades, Brenda had carefully constructed a family narrative where Brittany was the shining star, and I was the dark, disappointing shadow. That entire narrative had just been publicly shattered. They had all witnessed my power and influence firsthand. There was absolutely no way to gaslight their way out of this harsh reality. They were the pathetic outcasts tonight. They were the ones who did not belong. The extravagant decorations and the expensive flowers suddenly looked incredibly foolish. They had spent thousands of dollars trying to buy an illusion that evaporated the second it was tested. But as they sat there quietly drowning in their own pathetic misery, they had absolutely no idea that the worst part of their night was still waiting to spring its final devastating trap. At exactly 11:30, the venue manager walked into the room. He was a tall man in a sharp black suit holding a digital tablet, and he did not look happy. He bypassed the catering staff and walked directly toward the table where Jamal and Brenda were sitting. The manager did not offer a polite smile or ask how they were enjoying the evening. His face was set in a very firm and uncompromising line. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the empty room. "We have a very serious financial issue that needs to be addressed immediately." Jamal lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot and exhausted. He assumed the manager was going to ask about overtime or gratuity. Jamal let out a very heavy sigh and reached for his wallet, telling the manager to just put whatever extra charges there were on the card they had on file. The manager slowly shook his head again. "I am afraid I cannot do that, sir," the manager replied. "The payment method you provided earlier has been completely rejected. The $24,000 final payment for tonight has just been flagged by the bank for severe financial fraud." Brenda let out a sharp gasp and dropped her napkin. Jamal sat up perfectly straight, the exhaustion instantly replaced by pure adrenaline. "What are you talking about?" Jamal demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "That is absolutely impossible. The deposit cleared perfectly fine. Run the credit card again right now." The manager tapped his tablet and turned the screen to face them. The bank did not just decline the charge, the manager explained in a cold, professional tone. They completely froze the entire line of credit and issued a federal fraud alert. "The funds do not exist. You currently owe this venue $24,000 for services rendered tonight. I need an alternative method of payment right now. If you cannot settle this balance immediately, I am required by corporate policy to call the Chicago police and file a formal report for severe theft of services." The threat of the police hung in the air like a physical weight. Jamal panicked completely. He quickly pulled out 2 personal credit cards and handed them to the manager, desperately begging him to split the charge. The manager swiped the first card. It was declined. He swiped the second card, maxed out entirely. The harsh reality of the situation crashed down on them with devastating force. Jamal had already drained his savings for the deposit, and he had absolutely no more credit available anywhere. Brenda began to hyperventilate, clutching her chest as a full panic attack took over her body. She knew exactly why that bank account was frozen. She knew that the forged signature on the home equity line of credit had been discovered by the authorities. "Oh my God," Brenda gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "We are going to jail. They know about the signature." Brittany rushed to her mother, screaming for someone to bring a glass of water. The catering staff watched the chaotic scene unfold with open disgust. The manager stepped back, folding his arms across his chest. "I am calling the authorities right now," the manager stated firmly, turning to walk toward the lobby. Jamal tried to chase after him, begging for a payment plan, but the manager completely ignored him. At that exact moment, the bright overhead fluorescent lights of the venue clanged on abruptly, killing the soft, romantic ambiance forever. The party was officially over. They were completely broke, humiliated, and about to be arrested. The charity gala concluded exactly the way I planned. It was a triumph. By 2 in the morning, the billionaires and tech founders had taken their private elevators to their cars. My staff flawlessly managed the exit logistics, and I returned to my luxury condo overlooking Lake Michigan. The adrenaline of the evening was wearing off, replaced by a deep, profound peace. I walked into my bathroom, slipped out of my black velvet gown, and washed the makeup from my face. I pulled on a simple silk robe and poured a glass of sparkling water. The city outside my floor-to-ceiling windows was quiet. I sat on my plush sofa enjoying the rare stillness of the night. I knew the trap downstairs had been sprung, but I was content to wait until morning to hear the results. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, cleansing breath. Then at exactly 3:15 in the morning, the sharp ringing of my cell phone shattered the silence of my apartment. I opened my eyes and looked at the glowing screen on the coffee table. The caller identification displayed my twin sister's name, Brittany. I did not rush to pick it up. I let it ring 4 times, savoring the desperate urgency radiating from the device. When I pressed the green button and lifted the phone, I did not even get a chance to say hello. A piercing, hysterical scream erupted, forcing me to hold the phone away from my head. It was Brittany, and she was completely unhinged. Her voice was unrecognizable, distorted by raw panic and pure rage. She was sobbing so violently she could barely form coherent sentences, but the venom in her tone was unmistakable. "You ruined my entire life!" Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing loudly in my quiet living room. "You stole my guests, Lauren. You purposely booked that penthouse just to ruin my birthday and steal the people Jamal invited. You are an evil, jealous monster. You could not stand to see me happy, so you stole everything from me." I sat perfectly still, listening to the glorious sound of her crumbling reality. Brittany did not stop to take a breath. She launched into a frantic, breathless monologue detailing the catastrophic collapse of her high society illusion. She screamed about walking back into the empty solarium and sitting in silence. But then her rant shifted to the professional fallout. "And Jamal is fired." Brittany wailed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "His boss called him 20 minutes after we left the lobby. Harrison Cole called his cell phone and fired him, Lauren. He told Jamal to clear out his desk on Monday morning because he was an embarrassment to the venture capital firm. Jamal is completely destroyed. He is throwing things around our apartment right now, blaming me for the whole disaster. You ruined his career. You took away his promotion. How could you do this to your own family? You made us look like absolute fools in front of the entire Chicago financial district." The beautiful irony of her accusations washed over me. She was blaming me for making them look like fools when they were the ones who crashed a private charity gala. But the best part of her late-night meltdown was still coming. Brittany's sobbing intensified, turning into a frantic, breathless panic. "And Mom is at the police station!" Brittany screamed, the words tumbling out in a terrified rush. The venue manager brought the bill at 11:30, and the credit card was declined. The bank froze the entire $24,000 payment. They said it was flagged for financial fraud. Jamal tried to use his credit cards, but they were maxed out. The manager locked the doors and actually called the police on us, Lauren. Real police officers walked into the solarium and questioned us like common criminals. Mom had a massive panic attack, and the police escorted her to the precinct for questioning about the bounced payment and the bank fraud alert. My mother is sitting in a police interrogation room right now because of you. The sheer audacity of her entitlement was staggering. Even as her world burned down around her, she viewed herself as the absolute victim. She refused to take any accountability for the stolen money or the forged signature. Instead, she delivered her final insane demand. "You are going to fix this right now," Brittany commanded, her voice dropping into a desperate, demanding growl. "I know you are rich, Lauren. I saw you with that billionaire. I saw your stupid luxury gala. You have millions of dollars and you are going to use it to save our family. You need to call the police station and pay the $24,000 venue bill right this second so they let Mom go. And then, you are going to call Harrison Cole and tell him it was a misunderstanding so Jamal can get his job back. You owe us, Lauren. We are your family. If you do not fix this right now, you are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are completely dead to this family. Fix it right now. I listened to the heavy sound of her breathing through the speaker. She laid out her pathetic situation, demanding I rescue her from her horrific actions. She believed throwing a tantrum would force me to open my checkbook and save her. She thought I was still the quiet sister who would absorb abuse to keep peace. I sat on my sofa looking out over the beautiful city of Chicago. A satisfied smile spread across my face. Brittany had handed me the final piece. She confirmed the destruction of their financial, social, and professional lives. Jamal was unemployed and Brenda was detained. The voice on the line waited for me to apologize and fix the mess. But I was not going to fix anything at all today. I was finally and absolutely completely free from them forever. I let Brittany's frantic breathing fill the silence for a few long seconds. She was waiting for me to apologize or scream back at her. She was waiting for the familiar family dynamic where she throws a tantrum and I immediately fold to keep the peace. But the woman holding the phone in the penthouse overlooking the lake was not the sister she grew up with. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, feeling the cool liquid coat my throat. When I finally spoke, my voice was a whisper of absolute icy calm. It was the exact tone I used when dismantling a hostile corporate takeover. I did not bounce the payment, Brittany, I said, articulating every single syllable with lethal precision. My corporate fraud department did. The line went dead silent. The hysterical sobbing stopped instantly, replaced by a sharp intake of breath. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a new kind of fear. "What fraud department?" I leaned back against the plush cushions of my sofa. "Lumina Public Relations does not just book venues." I explained, my voice smooth and steady. "We process millions of dollars in corporate accounts every single week. Because we handle such massive budgets, we run a standard financial vetting trace on every large transaction that passes through our affiliated vendors. When Mom and Jamal submitted that final $24,000 payment to the Grand Solarium, my software flagged the routing numbers. I know exactly where that money came from, Brittany. I know it did not come from a savings account. And I know it did not come from a standard credit card." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over her. I could almost hear the gears turning in her panicked brain as she realized the massive wall she had just crashed into. It came from a home equity line of credit. I continued, my tone completely conversational, as if I were discussing the weather. But it was not tied to Mom and Dad's house in the suburbs. It was tied to the commercial property on the south side of the city. The property that Grandpa left to both of us in a joint trust. The property that explicitly requires my legal notarized consent to borrow against. Brittany let out a small, pathetic whimper. I kept pushing, driving the nail perfectly straight into the coffin. "I pulled the loan documents on Tuesday afternoon, Brittany. I read the entire file. I saw Mom's signature acting as the guarantor. I saw your signature right next to hers. And right below yours on the line requiring my legal consent, I saw a very convincing forgery of my own name. You and Mom forged my signature to illegally extract $30,000 of equity from my inheritance just so you could buy caviar and ice sculptures for a birthday party." "That is not true," Brittany stammered, her voice cracking wildly. "Mom said she handled the paperwork. Mom said it was just a temporary loan from the bank. I did not know it was your property. Do not lie to me." I snapped, my voice flashing with a brief hint of steel before returning to that terrifying calm. "Your signature is on the final page right next to the fraudulent notary stamp. Ignorance is not a legal defense in a federal court. You actively participated in stealing from me. You thought I was just some quiet little receptionist who would never see the financial statements. You thought you could throw a massive, glamorous networking event with my money, and I would just sit in my apartment and eat my slice of leftover cake." "Lauren, please. she begged, her voice dissolving into fresh, frantic tears. "We will pay it back. Jamal will get a new job, and we will pay back every single cent. Just call the bank and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell the police you authorized the loan. You have to save Mom. They are questioning her in a holding room right now." I let out a soft, chilling laugh. "That is the best part of this entire situation, Brittany. You still think this is just a little family misunderstanding. You think I can just make a phone call and fix it. You do not understand the magnitude of what you have done. I did not just find out about this tonight. I found out on Tuesday. I took those forged documents straight to my corporate attorney. We drafted a comprehensive report detailing the identity theft, the forged signatures, and the bank fraud." I stood up from my sofa and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city lights far below. I specifically instructed my lawyer to forward the entire dossier to the bank fraud department and the Chicago police authorities, but I told him to wait. I told him to hold the files until the party was already happening. I wanted you to put on your expensive dress. I wanted Jamal to invite all of his wealthy bosses. I wanted you to rack up the entire massive bill before the bank froze the stolen funds. You did this on purpose," Brittany gasped, realizing the full scope of the trap she was sitting in. "I orchestrated every single second of it," I replied coldly. "The police officers at the solarium right now are not just there because of a bounced catering check. They are there because the venue manager reported a theft of services triggered by a federal fraud alert. Mom is not just answering questions about a declined credit card. She is sitting in an interrogation room facing charges for grand larceny and wire fraud. And since your signature is on that fraudulent loan document too, it is only a matter of time before they come looking for you. The fake empire you built is completely annihilated, and I have absolutely zero mercy left to give to you today." The silence on the other end of the phone was absolute. For a moment I thought Brittany had dropped the receiver. Then I heard the sound of her ragged, shallow breathing. Her entire world was collapsing around her, and she was finally realizing that there was no way out. But even in the face of federal fraud charges, her mind desperately searched for a scapegoat. She could not accept that her own actions had caused this. So she pivoted back to her husband. Jamal did not know about the loan. She suddenly cried out, her voice grasping at a pathetic lifeline. "Jamal just wanted to network with his boss. You ruined his career for absolutely nothing, Lauren. He just wanted to say hello to Harrison, and you got him fired out of pure spite. He was humiliated in the lobby and then fired over the phone because you are a petty, vindictive person." I let out a slow, deep breath, shaking my head, even though she could not see me. "You really married a man just as delusional as you are, Brittany," I said, my voice dripping with pity. "Do you honestly believe a venture capital firm fires a vice president just because he got turned away at a velvet rope? People get embarrassed at parties all the time. That is not a fireable offense. Jamal lied to you tonight. He lied to you about why he was terminated because he is too much of a coward to admit what he actually did." Brittany stopped crying. "What do you mean he lied?" she asked, her tone shifting from angry to uncertain. I took another sip of my water, settling in to deliver the next blow. "When Harrison Cole and I went up to the penthouse, we went straight to my private office behind the main event space," I explained. "Harrison was disgusted by Jamal's behavior in the lobby. He asked me why his mid-level vice president was trying to crash my charity gala. And because Harrison is a valued client and a personal friend, I decided to tell him the absolute truth. I told him exactly how Jamal funded your $34,000 birthday party." I walked over to the windows again, looking down at the dark streets. "I told Harrison that Jamal and my mother committed federal mortgage fraud. I explained that Jamal knowingly used $30,000 of stolen equity to throw a networking event. I told Harrison that his vice president manipulated an elderly woman and forged the signature of an estranged sister just to buy caviar and rent an ice sculpture. And I did not just tell him, Brittany. I showed him. I had copies of the forged loan documents right there in my desk. I handed the file to Harrison and let him read the fraudulent signatures for himself. I could hear Brittany gasping on the other end of the line. You showed his billionaire boss our loan documents, she whispered, sounding completely horrified. You exposed us to Harrison Cole. I absolutely did, I replied without a single ounce of regret. You need to understand how the real world works, Brittany. Harrison runs a venture capital firm that manages billions of dollars. His entire business is built on trust, discretion, and absolute financial integrity. If the public found out that one of his vice presidents was actively engaging in elder abuse and real estate fraud to fund a fake high society lifestyle, it would destroy the reputation of the entire firm. Harrison could not risk having a federal criminal managing his investment portfolios. As soon as he read those documents, he pulled out his phone and called the human resources director of his company. He fired Jamal on the spot to protect his firm from a federal indictment. Jamal was not fired because of a party. I continued systematically destroying the lies her husband had fed her. He was fired because he is a liability. He was fired because he is a fraud. He came back to your apartment and threw a temper tantrum, breaking things and blaming me because it was easier than admitting to his wife that he just ruined his own life. He used you, Brittany. He used our mother. He pushed you both to secure that money so he could play pretend with the rich boys. And when his fake empire collapsed, he did not protect you. He stood by while Mom got hauled away in a police cruiser, and then he ran home to cry about his lost job. The reality of my words hit her with devastating precision. The man she had married, the man she thought was her golden ticket to high society, was actually the architect of her destruction. He had dragged her into a federal crime and then lied to her face about the consequences. Her perfect marriage was a complete sham built on stolen money and massive insecurities. You and Jamal deserve each other, I said, my voice perfectly steady and cold. You spent your entire life stepping on me to make yourself feel taller. You demanded the spotlight, and you got it. But the spotlight does not just show the glamorous dress, Brittany. It exposes every single lie, every single forgery, and every single desperate attempt to look important. You bought a $34,000 ticket to your own funeral, and you dragged Mom and Jamal down with you. Lauren, please. She whispered, her voice completely broken. What are we going to do? What am I supposed to do? I looked out over the beautiful and bright, sparkling city lights of the massive Chicago skyline, feeling a profound sense of total closure. You are going to do exactly what criminals do, Brittany, I replied. You are going to hire a very good defense attorney to represent you in court. And you are never going to call this personal phone number ever again for the entire rest of your completely pathetic life. There was a long, hollow sound of shuffling and a loud gasp on the other end of the line, followed by a sharp clatter. Brittany had dropped her phone. The hysterical sobbing faded into the background, replaced by the chaotic ambient noise of the Chicago police precinct. I could hear the faint static of a dispatch radio and the heavy footsteps of officers walking across the linoleum floor. Then there was a frantic rustling sound as someone fumbled to pick up the device. When the voice came back on the line, it was not my sister. It was my mother. Brenda sounded completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, condescending woman who had sipped iced tea in her suburban kitchen and told me to come eat leftover cake was entirely gone. In her place was a terrified, desperate woman crying so hard she was choking on her own tears. Lauren. Please. My mother wailed, her voice trembling with raw panic. Lauren, you have to listen to me. You have to help me right now. They are treating me like a common criminal. They took my purse and they took my shoelaces. You have to call the bank and stop this madness. I did not interrupt her. I simply sat on my sofa, letting her drown in the reality of her own actions. Brenda took my silence as an opportunity to launch into the ultimate toxic family gaslighting routine. We are family, Lauren, she sobbed loudly, her desperate voice echoing endlessly through my dark and quiet apartment. You cannot do this to your own mother. I carried you for 9 months. I raised you. I gave you everything you needed to become this successful woman you are today. You owe me. It was just a small mistake with the paperwork. We were always going to pay it back. We just needed a little bit of cash to help your sister celebrate her special day. You know how sensitive Brittany is. You know how important Jamal's career is to their marriage. You cannot let them send me to federal prison over a tiny little misunderstanding about a signature. We are blood, Lauren. Family forgives each other. Family protects each other. You have to protect me." The sheer audacity of her words was almost poetic in its delusion. She was sitting in a police holding cell for stealing $30,000 from me, and she was still trying to convince me that I owed her a favor. When the guilt trip did not immediately force me to apologize, Brenda switched her tactics to pure financial desperation. "Brittany said you run a multi-million-dollar company," Brenda cried, her voice growing louder and more frantic. "She said you are friends with billionaires. If you have that much money, then $24,000 is absolutely nothing to you. It is just pocket change. Just write a check, Lauren. Call the venue manager and pay the bill. Call the bank and tell them you authorize the loan against your grandfather's property. If you do not clear this up, the bank will foreclose on the house. They will take the suburban house and your father and I will be out on the street. You cannot let them take our home, Lauren. What will the neighbors think? What will our church group say? You have to fix this. It is your ultimate duty as a loving daughter to take care of your parents when they need you." I listened closely to the pathetic begging pouring out of the phone speaker, but I did not feel even a single tiny shred of sympathy. I did not feel guilt. I did not feel the familiar, heavy obligation that had weighed me down for my entire childhood. I just felt incredibly tired of their endless manipulation. For 33 years, my mother had demanded absolute loyalty from me while offering absolutely none in return. When I started my public relations firm from my tiny college dorm room, she told me I was wasting my time. When I landed my first major corporate client, she changed the subject to talk about Brittany's new boyfriend. She had systematically ignored my existence unless she needed a scapegoat to make her golden child look brighter. And now, sitting in a cold precinct wearing the consequences of her own federal crime, she dared to lecture me about the duties of a daughter. She dared to invoke the concept of family protection after she had literally forged my signature to steal my inheritance. It was not just toxic, it was a spectacular display of narcissistic sickness. I leaned forward and rested my elbows on my knees, staring at the glowing skyline of the city that I had conquered completely on my own. "Lauren, please talk to me," Brenda begged, her voice deteriorating into a pathetic wet cough. "The detective is coming back into the room. They are talking about wire fraud and identity theft. I am too old to go to jail. Your father is beside himself. We will do anything you want. We will apologize to you in front of the whole family. We will invite you to every single holiday dinner. Just please use your money to make this go away. Give me your lawyer's phone number. Let him represent me. You have so much power, Lauren. You can fix this entire mess with one simple phone call. Please be the bigger person. Please save your family." Her pleas echoed in the quiet space of my luxurious living room. She was practically hyperventilating, begging for a rescue from the daughter she had always considered entirely worthless. The power dynamic had completely inverted. I held her freedom, her reputation, and her financial future right in the palm of my hand. I let her cry into the phone for a few more seconds, just absorbing the absolute finality of this moment. Then I took a deep breath and prepared to give her my very last words before hanging up. I listened to the pathetic begging pouring through the speaker of my phone. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably in a police holding cell, surrounded by the cold reality of her own actions. For a brief second, a tiny fragment of the little girl inside of me wanted to give in. That little girl had spent 33 years desperately chasing the approval of the woman crying on the other end of the line. She wanted to believe that if she just wrote a check and saved the day, she would finally be loved and completely accepted by her own family. She wanted to believe that saving them from federal fraud charges would magically transform them into the loving, supportive parents I always deserved. But the strong, independent woman sitting in the penthouse knew better. I knew that paying that $24,000 bill would not buy me their respect. It would only buy them a free pass to continue abusing me. It would only validate their deeply held belief that I was a human safety net existing purely to catch them when their toxic behavior finally caught up with them. I took a deep breath, letting her go forever. I am not writing a check, Mom, I said, my voice completely steady and devoid of any emotion. The sobbing on the other end of the line hitched, catching in her throat. Lauren, please, she whispered, her voice sounding incredibly small and terrified. I shook my head even though she could not see me. You do not get to invoke the word family only when you are facing the severe consequences of your own crimes, I continued. Real family does not forge signatures. Real family does not steal $30,000 of equity from their own daughter for a party. You made a very clear choice when you signed my name on those loan documents. You chose your favorite child, and you chose the illusion of wealth over my financial security. You gambled my inheritance to buy a few hours of fake glamour, and now you have lost the bet completely. But we did it for Brittany, my mother cried out, trying one last desperate time to justify her felony. We did it to help Jamal with his career. We were just trying to help your sister get ahead in life. You have always been so incredibly self-sufficient, Lauren. You never needed us the way she does. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh that echoed through my quiet living room. You are right about one thing, Mom, I replied. I never needed you. I built a multi-million-dollar public relations firm entirely on my own, while you were busy coddling a grown woman who cannot even afford her own birthday cake. But being self-sufficient does not give you the right to steal from me. It does not give you the right to treat me like a disposable bank account just to feed your own massive egos. You did not do this to help Brittany. You did it because you are deeply insecure and you wanted to look like a wealthy, high society matriarch in front of Jamal and his venture capital friends. You wanted the spotlight just as much as Brittany did. I stood up from the plush sofa and walked slowly toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The Chicago skyline stretched out before me, a glittering ocean of lights reflecting off the dark surface of Lake Michigan. I looked down at the streets far below, feeling an incredible sense of altitude and real power. I had climbed out of the dark, toxic pit my family had dug for me, and I was never going down there again. I brought the phone closer to my mouth, ready to deliver the final killing blow. You told me you could only afford one party, Mom, I said, my voice ringing with absolute chilling finality. You told me I was too independent and I should just come eat leftover cake. You were right. You bought a $34,000 ticket to your own bankruptcy. Enjoy the hangover. Before she could utter another single pathetic excuse, I disconnected. The line went instantly dead. The sudden silence in my apartment was absolute and profound. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of an empty venue. It was the beautiful, liberating silence of a clean break. I did not put the phone down immediately. I opened my contact list and went straight to my mother's name. I pressed the block button and confirmed it without hesitation. Next, I scrolled to Brittany's name. I thought about her $2,000 emerald dress and her completely shattered marriage. I pressed block on her number too, erasing her from my bright future forever. Then, I found Jamal's number. I thought about his arrogant speech in the kitchen and his humiliating rejection at the velvet rope. I pressed block, permanently banning him from my life. Finally, I scrolled to my father's number. Richard had stood by silently for 33 years, letting my mother and sister treat me like garbage. His silence was just as toxic as their screaming. I pressed block on his number, completing the circle. I placed the phone face down on the polished surface of my coffee table. The digital connection to my toxic past was entirely and completely severed. They were trapped in a nightmare of federal fraud charges, unemployment, public humiliation, and impending bankruptcy. They were drowning in the severe consequences of their own malicious actions. And for the first time in my entire life, I was not going to throw them a life preserver. I turned away from the phone and walked toward my bedroom, feeling lighter than I had ever felt before. I was finally completely free from their shadow. I was ready to start living my authentic life, without the burden of their expectations dragging me down. I smiled and turned off the apartment lights. 6 months have passed since that spectacular night in the penthouse. The bitter chill of the Chicago winter has finally melted away, giving way to a bright and promising spring. The change in the season reflects the transformation in my own personal life. When I blocked my family numbers, I did not just cut off communication. I severed a rotting anchor that had been dragging me down for 33 years. Without their constant demands draining my energy, my life flourished. Lumina Public Relations did not just survive the drama, we expanded exponentially. The tech and finance charity gala I hosted was such a massive success that it fundamentally shifted the corporate hierarchy of the city. Harrison Cole completely transferred all of his affiliate portfolios to my agency, and within 3 months we had to lease another floor of our building just to accommodate our new staff. I am an untouchable, powerful force. I am the woman who controls the narrative for the most powerful people in the Midwest. But while my world expanded upward, my family's fake empire collapsed into dust. The legal machinery I set in motion that Sunday morning was absolutely ruthless. When the bank fraud department and the federal investigators verified my forged signature on the home equity line of credit, they immediately pressed charges. Brenda and Richard were absolutely terrified. The reality of federal prison time finally shattered their arrogant delusions. To avoid serving time behind bars, they were forced to accept a brutal plea deal that required immediate and full financial restitution, along with massive legal penalties. They had to sell their pristine, sprawling suburban home. The house with the manicured lawn and the expensive sports cars parked in the driveway was auctioned off to cover their massive debts and attorney fees. They now live in a cramped, outdated 2-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. Their wealthy country club friends and church group acquaintances completely abandoned them the moment the fraud investigation became public knowledge. They spent their entire lives obsessing over their social image, and now they do not even have a society to belong to. They are outcasts living in the shadows of the world they tried to impress. Jamal and Brittany suffered a fate that was arguably much worse, because they actually have to live with each other. After Harrison Cole fired Jamal and blacklisted him from the venture capital world, Jamal's career was entirely vaporized. No reputable financial firm in Chicago would even look at his resume after hearing the whispers of his involvement in elder abuse and real estate fraud. Without his massive salary, the luxury cars were quickly repossessed, and they were evicted from their expensive downtown loft. Today, Jamal is working as a mid-level retail branch manager at a small strip mall bank. Instead of pitching million-dollar tech startups to billionaires, he spends his days arguing with angry customers over overdraft fees and trying to meet pathetic quotas for opening basic checking accounts. His massive ego has been completely crushed under the weight of his grim reality. He wears cheap, off-the-rack suits and constantly looks exhausted. The man who once thought he was a corporate king is now just another tired retail worker dreading his morning commute. Brittany was forced to sell her $2,000 emerald gown, along with almost every other designer item in her closet, just to keep their electricity turned on. The golden child who once demanded the spotlight now spends her days sitting in a tiny rundown rental apartment, furiously blaming Jamal for ruining her life. And Jamal blames her right back. Their marriage has devolved into a toxic, miserable war zone of mutual resentment and bitter daily accusations. They have absolutely no money, no status, and no future. They sacrificed everything they had just to throw a single $34,000 party, and they will be paying off the emotional and financial hangover for the rest of their miserable lives. Their days are filled with endless arguments over grocery bills and unpaid utilities. There are no more lavish vacations or high society events. There is only the grim, suffocating reality of the consequences they brought upon themselves. I have not spoken a single word to any of them. They have tried reaching out through alternate phone numbers and fake social media accounts, begging for forgiveness and asking for financial loans, but I simply delete the messages without reading them. They do not exist to me anymore. Their chaos is no longer my problem to solve. I have completely detached myself from their endless drama, and the silence is exceptionally beautiful. I no longer feel the heavy burden of being the family scapegoat. I am completely shielded by the impenetrable boundaries I have built around my heart. This evening, I am standing alone in my corner office looking out through the massive glass windows at the beautiful Chicago skyline. The city lights are just beginning to twinkle against the deep purple twilight of the sky. I hold a warm cup of coffee in my hands, and I feel a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. For so long, I thought revenge had to be loud. I thought it required screaming matches and dramatic confrontations. But the most devastating revenge I could have ever taken was simply walking away and letting them destroy themselves. I finally understand that true family is not determined by blood or shared genetics. It is an incredibly profound realization that completely changes everything about my future. It is a beautiful feeling. I am finally safe. True family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, unwavering support, and genuine love. I had to let go of the toxic family I was born into so I could fully embrace the beautiful, authentic life I actually deserved. I am Lauren. I am 33 years old. And for the very first time in my entire life, I am completely and unapologetically free. The greatest lesson we can take away from Lauren's journey is that biology does not automatically entitle anyone to your unconditional loyalty, especially when they are actively destroying your peace. Society often pressures us to forgive and forget toxic behavior simply because the people hurting us share our bloodline. But setting yourself on fire just to keep your family warm is not an act of love, it is an act of self-destruction. Lauren's story teaches us the profound power of maintaining silent, strong boundaries. She did not win by screaming the loudest or by stooping to their level of manipulation. She won by letting their own arrogance become the architect of their downfall. Walking away from people who intentionally misunderstand your value is the ultimate form of self-respect. You are allowed to build a beautiful life far away from the people who treated you like an afterthought. Now, I want to hear from all of you watching right now. Have you ever had to make the incredibly difficult decision to cut ties with a toxic family member to protect your own personal peace and mental health? How did your life change after you finally walked away? Please drop your stories in the comments section below, because sharing your experiences might give someone else the exact courage they desperately need today. If Lauren's satisfying journey to freedom resonated with you, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more empowering stories of resilience and sweet justice. Do not forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming videos. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember that you always have the absolute right to write your very own beautiful, peaceful ending. I will see you in the next video.